Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining for another exciting AdvisorShares AlphaNooner. Today, we're excited to spend some time digging into the world of cannabis banking and beyond. We're very excited to welcome for the first time Terry Mendez, CEO of Safe Harbor Financial. Excited to spend some time talking through what Safe Harbor does and how it interacts with the cannabis industry, as well as where things might head as we are potentially coming to rescheduling in the world of cannabis. So with all that said, thanks for joining if you're out there. Two, if you have any questions or comments, we'll get to them as we go along. Terry and I were talking earlier. I feel like he has some great quick hit opinions on things. So if you have questions, let them loose. I think we like talking about all different areas of cannabis, and banking is one that we've touched on in the past, but haven't really dug into in a lot of depth. So I think this will be a great episode and a great kind of time to spend digging into the banking side of things. So with all that said, Terry, thanks for joining. Really appreciate it. And how is your week? I guess you're at a halfway point. How's the week been so far? Busy?
Week's been amazing. We're up and down every day trying to change the world in cannabis and navigate with our clients and help them on their journey. We watched the State of the Union yesterday. I was hoping to hear a little bit about cannabis and rescheduling. I was disappointed not to see that. But I think, we're sniffing around the corners, and hopefully this first quarter or early in the second quarter, we see some real movement.
Yep. I think it's an exciting time. We always talk about in cannabis. I think people who are attracted to cannabis in any angle in any area of the industry have that drive, are really interested in pushing things forward. And I think that kind of fits you. So maybe where we should start before we jump in more depth is kind of with you and your background. I know we were actually talking at a conference a little bit earlier this past year. And you have a very interesting story in terms of how you got into the world of cannabis, and I'd love to start there.
Yeah, no problem at all. So I spent most of my career in fintech, working with technology companies in what we called Silicon Alley in New York City, as opposed to Silicon Valley, and really working in this area where if there were moments that mattered, talking about CEO, CFO turnover, grabbing an opportunity, something went wrong and you have to overcome that something that went wrong that was really impactful for a company, they would send me and my team in. It was called Grow and Defend Fortress Deloitte. And it took the best people out of the consulting side of Deloitte and the best people out of the advisory side, the accounting people, pull them together to solve a problem uniquely. And I've been doing that basically my entire career in the tech space. Back in 2019, they asked me to do that in the cannabis space. I originally said no. I thought I might be disowned by my family. That didn't happen, right? And I really didn't know anything about the cannabis industry. We have a Green Solutions just down the block from where I live, and it's in a renovated TD Bank building. And I always thought that was a environmental remediation company. I had no idea it was a cannabis company. You put a gun to my head, said find a joint in Denver, I wouldn't have found it. Fast forward 7-8 years being in this industry, heck of a journey. I've learned a ton. But I really started by working in each phase of the business. I said I didn't want to take my first CEO role until I did trimming, and I was in the pick and pack room, and I helped with the cultivator, and I was in the extraction facility in the room as a regular everyday guy versus the leader. So I knew what I was talking about. And then once you have that domain expertise, I've helped Dalwhinnie, which is a single state operator here in Colorado, overcome some challenges that they were facing. And then I helped a multi-state operator, Nature's Medicine. Many people know them as Nature's Medicine or Pure Life in New Mexico. Reshaped that organization and did some incredible deals with Story Cannabis, Good Day Farms, Send, and others, unlocking more than $75 million of value and really transforming that relationship and that organization. And so, it's been a great run. Got to meet Sunday Siegfried about a year ago. I can't believe I've been at Safe Harbor for a year, more than a year now. But, about a year ago, I met Sunday at an event. We talked about how to strategize as being a public company traded in the NASDAQ. And before I knew it, she was asking me to take her role as CEO as she went down the path of retirement. Wonderful board member, but really the founder in many ways. I look up to her because she was the founder of cannabis banking. She was the one at the U.S. Senate hearings and the congressional hearings, the one that was investigated personally and professionally and got the FinCEN letter passed in 2014. So big shoes to step into, but hopefully I'm doing her proud.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think a lot to carry forward in terms of where we are now, but great to have that groundwork. Of course, it's sort of, everything is built on the shoulders of giants. And I think that, that tracks there as well. I do want to get into safe harbor as well, just sort of from a high level. I think most
Sure.
people are probably familiar, but I think it's just helpful to have that table set for anyone who is, joining new.
Not a problem. Again, Safe Harbor was one of the very first financial institutions when we were a division of a credit union to say yes to accepting cannabis deposits. We were the trendsetters. We opened the doors, and we actually wrote the book on what the gold standard of compliant cannabis banking looked like. In 2022, we went public. We're a non-depository company. We don't make loans and we don't hold deposits, but we help our banking partners be successful in holding deposits and making loans. We've done over $100 million of loans over the last decade. We have not yet had a write-off on those loans, which is pretty, interesting thought. Same thing on the financial services side. We've helped grow businesses, about 15 of them over a short period of time, now accept cannabis banking because Safe Harbor has helped them with their cannabis banking program. And so we've moved the company quite a bit. Today, we help folks to, let's say 10 years ago, people needed a bank account. Today, people need a partner. And why is it that Terry Mendez, someone who has no banking experience at all, sits on top of a bank fintech? It's because domain expertise in a grassroots industry is really, really important. To be able to say you've been there and done that and go beyond banking, partner with your clients so that they're successful, and our financial institutions that call us, that are our customers, keep their deposits longer. Super hard for them to compete, some of them, when they can't make a $100 million loan to Curaleaf, right? How do you keep those deposits? We help solve those problems for the financial institutions. And even when you can't keep all of the deposits, you want to be able to keep the relationship. And so Safe Harbor, I've been talking to people. Remember back in the 80s and early 90s, people said Intel inside? You wanted to buy a computer with Intel inside. I say you want a financial institution with Safe Harbor inside because you have someone that knows your space.
Yeah, that's important. I think they still put the stickers on the laptops that have that sort of the branding of Intel inside. So that makes sense. A good parallel, though. I think that makes sense. And I think interesting to kind of show how sort of the needs for cannabis and financial services around it have shifted from the beginning. Because I know for most people, when they think about cannabis and banking, they think about the debanking element, which I think you have gone through as well. I know many people in the space have gone through personally and understand how frustrating
that is painful.
Yeah. I mean, and it's not something that's hyper or exclusively unique, I think, to cannabis. I think there have been a lot of parallels drawn with crypto. We were talking earlier about that. And I think, either way, I think it's important to have that partner to be able to kind of push you through, and also someone with the experience to kind of help in a team, I guess, ultimately to kind of help consult you as you, make these changes and have this kind of initial support.
That was one of the first things I tried to solve when I became part of Safe Harbor. You are right. I was personally debanked by an organization I had funds with for over 20 years. And they gave me 30 days to get my money off their platform. And I wasn't able to trade or sell, and the stock market wasn't doing well in those 30 days. So I couldn't protect myself. I lost quite a bit of money. And it's difficult to move your financial picture around that quickly. When I got to Safe Harbor, one of the things I tried to accomplish is I want to bank all the employees. Not only do I want to bank the companies, but I want to bank the employees. They should have access to auto loans and mortgages and overdraft protection. And I had, a couple hundred employees at Nature's Medicine working directly with me. And it's a tragedy when they have to go to the check cashing place to get their check cashed. We just launched something called Safe Harbor Retirement Solutions. Brand new. It's the first fully transparent, multiple employer 401k account. Can you imagine for a second when you're working for I would sign these papers and they would say, if you want a 401k account, that's great. But you need to have a magic name that doesn't say cannabis in it, and you have to hide this because if ever it becomes that, we know that you're a cannabis company, you can get kicked off. Well, that's one thing. As the CFO or CEO, you don't want to tell your employees, sorry, your 401k benefits went away. But The worst side is giving them a check and saying, here's the money you saved. Now you have 30 days to go put it somewhere else. And, Fidelity and Charles Schwab and Vanguard, they don't want your money. Right? They don't want cannabis money. So where is that employee going to put it? And so now we've solved that problem too. And so a lot of the things that I talk about and I work on every day are real problems that I faced when I was the CEO of an operator.
Yeah, no, I think I mean, having that experience and understanding kind of where people's and companies' pain points are and kind of what they need ultimately to operate basically as a normal business in a lot of ways. A 401k sounds very boring, but obviously is important and such a key element of employment, of having that relationship, all of that, I think, makes a huge difference. I also am curious, I feel like, getting kind of debanked on your own side of things in terms of that relationship. I'm imagining you're not going to want to bank with them in the future. So I think that emphasizes the importance of, working with partners that you really have a real relationship with, rather than, I think, getting burned.
We just had a client who, before my time, chose to leave one of our financial partners, went with a different local bank that had local tellers that you can drop money off at, and they got a letter in the mail and they gave them 30 days to find a new account. This is one of the largest operators in Florida. They're a multi-state operator. And they had 3 days before their payroll. They couldn't move money. They weren't allowed to cut checks. They weren't allowed to move ACHs or wires. Yep. And so we went through that process and helped them onboard 50-ish accounts in 3 days. An unheard of situation. But another reason why we launched yet another service called Managed Banking Services. What that means is you're changing your bank accounts like changing your credit card. You ever get a fraudulent notice on your credit card? Now I got to go into Netflix or Hulu and everything under the sun to change where those point and they pull. And then you get the nasty grams that you missed one and we're going to cancel your account. So we have a service now that helps folks that are in those situations repoint and do it in a way that avoids fraud.
Yep. Again, I think that's important over the long run, building out those different ways to support ultimately companies trying to navigate through in the cannabis space. I am seeing some questions come through which are interesting. One, hi, Stevie. He's mentioning that Schwab doesn't mind if you trade cannabis stocks on their platform. I think that is true. I think, cannabis is fraught with a lot of paradoxes and conflicts. Again, hopefully we see that kind of, work its way out eventually. Renato's got an interesting question. Any relation, you might not have any thoughts, but any relation or thoughts on Anchorage getting involved with Bitcoin payments? Again, that's maybe outside of that sort of more crypto.
I'll speak to it a little bit. So I've looked at the crypto space extensively. I've attended the CBC conference in Washington, D.C. And there is absolutely a capability or a place for crypto in the world of cannabis. Right now, crypto money exchanges are cheaper than doing ACHs and wire transfers. So as people get comfortable, now your average consumer in the cannabis space makes somewhere between $50,000 and $75,000 a year. Now, in the intoxicating hemp space, that number is actually higher. But in the cannabis space, that's your average. So you're not looking at your customer per se and saying, well, do you want to pay with crypto? But in the B2B space, crypto payments could be a lot cheaper than moving money, ACH or wire transfer. And as people get more comfortable with that, it is a way to save money.
Really interesting. And the efficiency of getting it done, I guess, immediately is a key thing there. Interesting. I think that is something that does require probably support and having someone you can go to ask those questions. I think while crypto has been around for a good amount of time now, I think there is still some hesitation around using it all the time. So
there are risks, right? A crypto movement is not FDA, DIC assured. Know your customer, BSA, AML, still important aspects of moving money through the American banking system. Crypto accounts are not really owned by you. They're owned by the crypto exchange. And so while you own a share of that, if those companies go belly up, you lose your money. And so there is risk within the crypto space that, an educated person making that decision needs to consider.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's true, again, even of being in the cannabis business. Obviously, risks there as well. As long as you understand them and the bounds, that's fair. You're able to opt in on that front. Okay, well, I did want to kind of check in just because, again, you've been in the position for a little over a year now, which is great to see. I know there have been some highlights in terms of things you've been able to get done. Would love to kind of walk through some of those and then kind of, move further into.
We've done a wall-to-wall restructuring. In the dispensary business, I say it's a four-wall restructuring. We looked at the organization and said, cannabis banking is an area that can continue to grow, but we need to be more local and we need to be more present in that space. But we need to also be able to solve borrowing. So we've created capabilities within our system to network with private equity and family offices so that no matter where you are in the risk spectrum, perhaps there's an ability for us to represent you in raising the capital that you need to be successful. We have acquired 420 IT in December. They did a number of on-site reviews on behalf of banks. Many of those banks continue now to work with Safe Harbor. And as we expand that, they work directly with cannabis operators every day. That's what made it interesting to me, because effectively when you need something, whether that's outsourced finance, accounting, HR, IT, transaction advisory support, we could be there to help you through that process. And as a partner, we become more valuable to you, right? So we want to be able to do those types of things. We did a large recapitalization. Some people say it was a Hail Mary catch at the last second of the game, but we did a large recapitalization where we raised $6.9 million in incremental funds. We had our lenders recapitalize underneath that. So we got rid of all of our debt. And so we have absolutely no debt. We have, at that time, $6.9 million of cash in the bank. And we entered into something called an equity line of credit. And what an equity line of credit is, it's an ability for us to go out into the market and raise capital when and if necessary. And all of this was done, and this is important from an investor perspective. I don't know in total, all of this was done inside of equity. Most of these types of deals, because they have exploding warrant capabilities and others, are in this area called mezzanine. It's kind of like debt, it's kind of like equity. This is equity. And we needed to do that to shore up our ability to continue to be a NASDAQ listed company. And so we are now comfortable where we're at, and we don't need to raise the money in terms of like paying for our future. If we raise money under the ELOC, it's going to be about lending it into the cannabis industry effectively and at a rate that our investors really appreciate. The last thing we just did, and it was announced just a few days ago, we restructured our largest customer agreement. And as a result of that restructuring, over the next 6.25 years, we're bringing in about $11.5 million of funds with the minor incremental costs. And so that a lot of that should drop to the bottom line. And I'm excited about that because it does two things for us. One, it makes sure that I have a customer for a very long time, and that's our largest customer. It makes that relationship more profitable for us, but it also gives us, another reason to get in front of financial institutions and show them the success that we've helped a financial institution achieve and what we could do for them.
Yeah, a lot to pack in, I think, to a relatively short period of time, which is, again, what you want to see. I think making those changes, making those accomplishments as you go, which is great. I would love to spend some time kind of on that last bit, a little bit of what you talked about, just sort of in terms of clients and a little bit more of the spread there. Because I imagine, cannabis companies are picky when they're kind of looking at trying to find a partner. But I would imagine you're also somewhat picky on your side as well, ultimately, in terms of finding the right types of clients. Would love to hear sort of more about that large client if possible, and also kind of what generally your clients tend to look like.
Yeah, so most of I'll start with the last question first. Most of our clients are single state operators to mid-size MSOs. That's our lion's share of accounts. We have roughly $102 to $105 million of assets under management at any particular time. In the banking world, they call that average daily deposits. I still have to say AUM because that's how I grew up. Okay, but we look at that. We also look at a metric called the trailing 14-day average because we want to look at, make sure payroll is included in there. It's a big number for folks. And we're continuing to see improvement in our emerging market space where cannabis is on the rise. In the area where the markets are mature, it becomes a little harder. There's two types of risks to get to your first side. In an emerging market, the question is it real? You don't want to get involved with fraudsters or people that have particular kind of interesting backgrounds. And so you have to be, reasonable there. And remember, in the emerging side, Colorado, I don't know, it's 20 plus years. 20 years ago, you were considered illegal, and today you're legal. But now you've just been legal for 20 years. It doesn't matter, right? You're sitting in some of the states that just legalized cannabis. Yesterday, they were crooks, and today they're great. And so that's a mind shift change in the owner's perspective and a mind shift change in the banking perspective. We got to bring those together. And that's why many times I like to be the one telling the story on the operator's behalf, because I'm good at that, and I'd love to help you to be successful at that, right? And so as I think through that, our process is robust. We want to make sure that we're protecting the U.S. banking system, at the same time protecting the cannabis company. it is not unusual for a cannabis company to be subjected to fraud, whether it's vendor fraud, where someone just calls you up and says, oh, my bank account changed, please change it. And all of a sudden you're paying the wrong person, all the way to, spoofing your account number and your routing number off of a check. And all of a sudden checks are clearing that you didn't actually process. So we're very diligent in the process of validations, where your money's coming from and where your money's going to, because we're trying to protect you. Some people appreciate that a lot. Some people think it's a pain in the tush. It is the state of cannabis because, in order to have an account here, you need to make sure you comply with everything. Enhanced due diligence, anti-money laundering, Bank Secrecy Act, the list goes on and on. And for 11 years, we've never even had a regulatory snafu, right? We've been audited 25 times and never even a snafu. So we're trying to keep that up, because the more we do that, the more ability we have to represent financial institutions that want to bank cannabis operators.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I think it can be both a pain and also very important, of course. So I think it can be two things at once kind of thing.
Exactly.
But yeah, it makes sense, I think, to front load that work so you don't run into issues down the road. Because I know that can be expensive and painful. And I think that's obviously one of the big benefits. So that makes sense. And also, I just think in the current world and setup, there is so much more scams, I think, generally. I know AI has kind of, bloomed that ultimately and has made it much more easy for people to try to take money. So I think
tell everybody, make a phone call. You get an email that says, I need 50 grand, send me a wire transfer. Even if it looks legit, make the phone call. We even had a situation, this was before Safe Harbor, but in my other experiences, where someone cloned my voice. And in cloning my voice, the AI clone of my voice called somebody and asked the person to give some folks a raise in the organization. And then thankfully my HR person understands that I don't give raises. And so I'm joking. So they called me up and validated, but it was to her a perfect replica of my voice. So you got to be careful.
Yeah, that's true. That's really interesting. I feel like at some point you almost need like a password or a safe something to know that it's really you, because it is a strange new world in general. But I think it all ties into that element of verifying, safety, tracking, all of that. In terms of getting clients and the trends there for these new markets that have opened up, have you had to turn away clients? Have there been things, because I feel like it does kind of take all types of people who are getting into the cannabis industry, and then a market turns on and, like you're saying, becomes legitimate. What's that experience been like in terms of selecting your clients from your perspective?
So we're really focused on the cannabis industry. And when it comes to the cannabis industry, we want your work. We want your business. And so we're not going to turn that away. The challenge has become the ancillary businesses. And I don't use that term like a service provider, but psilocybin to me is an ancillary business, right? And today there's no banking solution for psilocybin. It's a small industry, so it's hard to spend money and time to build something for a small industry. But I sat at the Denver Psychedelics Conference last year, and I was a shark on one of the panels, and I said to myself, this is another way that Safe Harbor could help people overcome an obstacle, because today there's no FinCEN letter that covers psychedelics, and it's legal in Colorado, it's legal in Oregon, it's legal in some other states. And so you sit back and you say, that is an opportunity, and how can I participate? And that's one of the reasons I was getting deep into the crypto space. Another area is this intoxicating hemp space, right? These are folks that are banking, real-time banking today with, JP Morgan and Citibank, Wells Fargo, Vectra Bank, TD Bank. They're all banking intoxicating hemp, whether they know it or not. Mm-hmm. Right? You can do Apple Pay and Venmo and intoxicating hemp. ADP doesn't bother you when you're in an intoxicating hemp space yet. Now you see the regulators moving towards banning 0.3% THC is nothing. You just got rid of doggy treats, right? Sure. And moving it into the cannabis regulated market. And so one of the things that I'd love to, start working with financial institutions on is, let's take this space on and let's help them navigate regulatory. I spent my entire career, I don't tell many people this, but effectively I started my career as an auditor for 14 years. I was the chief audit executive for Arrow Electronics, a Fortune 500 company. I don't know how I go from auditor to CEO, but I did, right? Yeah. But that compliance, navigating the regulatory space, the political space is what I do. And I'd love to help that industry navigate that. And part of navigating is showing that you can self-regulate. And if you can show self-regulation, goodness, you're a giant step forward. I don't think that intoxicating hemp goes away. If the world is great, I think that, maybe what you see is flower and dabbable products, vaping products, etc., move into the dispensary world, similar to regulated cannabis. Maybe you see intoxicating hemp companies owning their own dispensaries one day. I don't know. But what really survives this is the beverages. And with companies like Circle K and 7-Eleven and where the Chicago Bulls play in Illinois and others saying yes to intoxicating hemp, there's a lot of regulatory pressure to say, at least let me have this. And like I said in the beginning of this call, the folks that buy intoxicating beverages on average, according to what I see, make $125,000 and up. That's a different consumer that has a little more political power than the average cannabis consumer.
Yep. No, I think that's really interesting. It'll be kind of interesting to see where intoxicating hemp ends, because I know we have sort of the end of the year. It's coming up with the loophole closing. But you're right. I think there is such a demand for easy access to some kind of cannabis THC related product. Again, will that flow into sort of more of the regulated channels as they move? We'll have to see. But I do think the beverages element does seem different. I also think there's probably some element of it is much more difficult from like an illicit perspective to create, produce, go through a bottling plant ultimately to provide these beverages versus some of the more potentially dangerous, I guess, ultimately form factors like just flour itself or edibles.
So different regulatory standards, different testing standards, different everything. You sit down and you say, are we incurring more risk in those products? Maybe. Yep. There's just like any other industry, there are good operators and there's operators that cut corners.
Of course, that is true. All right, I do want to get to kind of where we potentially could be going from here. I know the hemp thing is also kind of on the docket for this year, and hopefully we also have rescheduling. So I want to get into that very shortly. I did see a question from Stevie that I want to pop up really quickly, though, which again, if you don't have an opinion on it, totally good. But he's asking from a banking perspective, what are your thoughts on biometric ID?
I think it's a great idea. I think the industry, though, is fearful of technology at certain levels. And I'll give you an example. I went live when I was working with Nature's Medicine and again in Dalwhinnie when I started that with biometric clocking in and clocking out for hourly employees. And I think I initially had a revolt, like nobody wanted to use this thing. And they didn't want Big Brother or Big Mother, understanding the, having their fingerprint. Until one of my sales guys turned to the crowd of folks and said, "You guys are morons." I had to laugh. And they all paid turn. He was a big guy. So they all looked at him and said, "What?" And they said, "Open your phone." And they all used their fingers or their faces to open their phones. And he said, "Big Brother already has it." And then people kind of said, "Okay." So biometrics, while a very good technology, as well as there's other ways to safeguard your accounts, will require consumers to buy into it. And, I don't know that, I think it's a good technology. I don't know that the cannabis industry trusts the technology yet, but there's not, I don't have any hard feelings about that technology.
No, I think that's well answered. I think it's one of those things where the core elements of any business are the same in terms of security, in terms of the tracking, all of that stuff. It's integrating how technology kind of intersects and figuring out what is useful, what is not. And again, that would probably even vary company by company, but I think good question and great answer. All right, well then I did want to turn, of course, to where we are in the world of rescheduling, how things potentially change from, a fintech kind of perspective on the other side of rescheduling for cannabis and banking and all that support there. Would love to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so not holding my breath, but I do believe it's going to happen soon. I think it's a wonderful thing for Safe Harbor because more financial institutions may look at the cannabis industry, which is growing rapidly, as a way to help their financial institution be successful. When I started with Safe Harbor a year ago, I was telling people by 2030, this should be a $75 billion industry. Now the statistics are saying maybe that's 2028. And by 2032, this will be well north of $100 billion industry. So if you're a financial institution, that's an interesting place to grow, particularly if you have capabilities that are outside the norm of what's available to a cannabis operator. So that's an exciting thing for Safe Harbor. It's an exciting thing for operators. 280E is an incredible tax on the company. And it creates the real tax is the impression left with investors. It's hard to raise money because the models they use don't contemplate an illicit drug, right? And taxes on net margins, let's say in a dispensary, right? And so you have to look at this and say, am I willing to make this risk? Now, interest rates have come down. So if interest rates have come down and I'm going to get, let's say, 12% on a loan on a cannabis operator, or I can get, 7% on a mortgage and take absolutely no risk. Now I get double the profit, but I'm taking more risk. Where do I go? And some investors go to the safer place, and some of the investors still continue to invest, for sure. But it's a challenge, right? Particularly in an industry where write-offs of loans, I know Safe Harbor hasn't experienced that, but write-offs of loans are things that happen. You saw Vireo just buy debt at 54 cents on the dollar. So those people that issued their debt took a big write-off.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting. Yeah, it'll be okay. That is interesting. In terms of kind of working with the clients you're working with now, how does sort of the relationship or what you're doing to support them change on the other side of rescheduling?
Yeah, so there's it's not that they changes, it's that they have more capability and optionality with what's in front of them. So I still want to help them operate and grow their business. I still want to hear what they're doing. I still want to help them from a treasury risk management perspective. But now they have some more options because they don't have a big bill in front of them. Yes. They can raise money differently. We got to change their model so they can talk about their projections and forecasts differently, right, when raising money. And then the question is, how are you going to tell the story on how you judiciously use somebody else's capital to increase the success of the organization and then pay them back? We have to sell a better story. And so I still work with companies exactly the same way I did before. They just have more options than they did yesterday.
More options and hopefully more money with that 280E element. I think that is definitely true. All right, final question I think I'm seeing coming in, which is question for each of you. What are your thoughts on safe banking? And also would love to hear how that kind of impacts.
So safe banking would be absolutely fantastic for us, right? What safe banking does, again, is allows other financial institutions more security than a 2014 FinCEN letter. FinCEN letter, just like anything else, can be one executive order away from disappearing. When you actually have legislation that brings that into a reality and then is a little bit more modern, look, this has been, 12 years since that letter was written. All of a sudden, you have something that other financial institutions, there's 10,000 of them in the US. There's only about 150 or so that actively attract cannabis deposits. Think about how much more technology and more investment comes in when those other financial institutions are interested in banking cannabis in their high-risk program. It will still be in their high-risk program. Safe Harbor still has a role to play. It actually has a bigger role to play post-safe banking than where we are today, because there will be more financial institutions that I call my customers.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. Yes, ultimately going from kind of untenable to still risky, but able to be on the table in terms of those institutions. So
they're not going to get their bank charters pulled, because some executive in the office decides that today that's not, is the last day of that FinCEN letter.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. All right, well then, I feel like this has been great in terms of sort of digging in and kind of covering Safe Harbor in general. Would love to get A, if you have any final thoughts, anything we missed, but then B, if anyone wants to follow along, kind of stay up to date, would love to know where to point people.
Yeah, so always go to our website, shfinancial.org. You can call me directly, and I tell people you can call me directly, and I give people my cell phone, so I'll do that as well, 631-418-7763, and I do that because I do want to help you. So, if you have an opportunity, you just want to run something by us, you never know. With this type of domain expertise, Safe Harbor is very different than most financial institutions. I actually know what a Mobius machine is. I bought mock tech machines in the past, and we can walk through some marketing thoughts and see if we can help you.
Very cool. All right. Well, Terry, thanks for taking the time. Really appreciate it. Great to kind of spend some time covering, the financial side of things, the banking side of things, and kind of where we could be going from here from a cannabis perspective. So really, really appreciate it. Thanks everyone for joining, and we will catch you next time. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Before investing, carefully consider the investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses found in the prospectus, available at AdvisorShares.com.